Hey, good evening. Welcome to #GotMoney. I'm Elizabeth Jackson. It's always a joy, an absolute joy to have Melanie from Southeast Lawyers join me on the show. Good evening, Melanie.
Good evening.
So Melanie, let's kick it off. I really want to unpack HIA contracts with you and dive into that a little bit. But before we start on contracts, can we just have, because we were talking about the builders scheme, is that the right?
Homebuilder.
Last week in the Southeast, 130 lots of land sold. The market is entirely reinvigorated and it is going nuts. The issue is this: some people don't understand how the payment of that $25,000 is actually going to come to them. Now, I run a business where we sell real estate, so I'm very, very busy facilitating transactions with clients that want that $25,000. We have been working on the assumption that the $25,000 is making up part of the deposit. Is that accurate?
Maybe yes, maybe no. We still don't have the legislation, so we don't know. But I know we spoke about this last week, right?
I'm not swearing online. I'm not swearing live to air. I feel like that would be rude.
Let's not go there. But I think it is a fair assumption to say that this $25,000 isn't going to come until settlement, as in land title settlement of the property, which is a problem if it's a house and land package.
So at the end of the construction?
When I'm speaking about the end, I mean when the property settles. So when it changes hands, because the scheme is supposed to be administered by the State Revenue Office, it would make sense for when the State Revenue Office gets involved, which is the stamp duty part, which is right at settlement of the property, for the $25,000 to be claimed at that point. That is the infrastructure they're looking at putting in place. Now, it's not quite right for people who are renovating because they're not going to have a stamp duty event, but I think for everybody else who is purchasing a house and land package, then you're going to be brought through the State Revenue Office for that $25,000. So if you're relying on it for your deposit, don't think we're going to see it being paid up front. So
there are two parts. The only time that stamp duty is payable is on the land. So once land is settled, State Revenue Office then expects payment then. The build contract is separate to that. So do we see the 25 grand come in? You see, we probably don't know. Do we see it come in on land settlement? And is it paid to the purchaser or to the builder? There's the other side of that too, isn't it?
We don't know. I wish I could tell you.
This is like a train wreck, isn't it? Because I spoke to the director of RPM Real Estate, which is one of the largest providers of land here in Victoria, other than maybe Oliver Hume and some of the bigger land estate holders. And he said to me, I'll tell you what he said. He sent me a list. I'm looking for land. He sent me a list of 340 lots. And from memory, he said to me last week, we sold 180 lots of titled land. So there's a real crazy frenzy buy without really knowing the parameters of the buy or how you're going to receive that money. Now, agents like me are assuming we can tuck it in as part deposit, and it's sounding to me like that's actually unverified. So I guess what we're saying,
that's fair.
There's a cautionary note around this, isn't there?
Yes, I think so. Until we see the legislation that has come out of this, we don't really know how they're going to implement it. We do know that there is going to need to be documentation filed with the State Revenue Office, and that the State Revenue Office is likely to be the one administering this scheme, but we don't know whether it's at the beginning of the contract, at the end of the contract. My gut feel is that it will be as late as possible in the whole process, because A, when does the government ever want to give you money up front to do anything? And B, I don't think the government will want to risk the possibility that they advance money to you on a contract and then you pull out of the contract and you've just got the 25,000. So they may require you to get partway through certain parts of the contract.
What they're doing in WA is they are paying the 25,000 on slab.
Mm-hmm.
So now that's hearsay. I got that from my lender who operates in WA. So I haven't seen any documentation to verify that. Is it prudent to suggest that they might look at following suit with WA if they're already, they kind of feel like they're a day and a half ahead of where we are down here in Victoria?
Yes, I think they are ahead. And I don't think it's prudent to follow that process, because if you look at the State Revenue Office website, which I did this morning, they are just linking everything back to the federal government at the moment. They're not. Yes, pretty much. They're not making any statements about how this will be administered. Or anything. They're just saying it's 25,000. This is the rough terms. Go look at the government websites, and the government websites aren't showing anything. So we are flying in the dark a bit. Ideally, we would like the $25,000 to be factored in to the lending process so that people can put down a smaller deposit. But I think if we're looking at it just on a straightforward cash basis, it would be dangerous to go in thinking that you're going to get this paid so that you can put your deposit down.
The other side of it too is the other component inside the mix is always the banks. And if the banks are looking at a lender's profile less $25,000, knowing that it's coming in, are they going to play nicely with us? And that's yet to be determined, isn't it?
Yes, we don't know if they will.
Oh, look. Well, you know you're going to have to be on the show again next week.
Oh, what a shame.
Isn't that's something? So the other side of this too, which we're doing a lot of at the moment, is a lot of people are buying property and they're navigating house and land contracts. And that's if you don't understand that space, it can be quite prickly. And I spend a lot of my time on the phones with clients, just giving them some comfort, sending them to solicitors like you, so you can start picking the bones of a land contract. Now, what you need to do as a purchaser, firstly, is reserve that land straight away, and that will be expected. Reserve the land and get a soft copy of those contracts. Get the soft copy of the contract immediately to your conveyancer, because you need to know what you're signing. Now, the land agents will put pressure on you to get that contract back. You must have a conveyancer in play before you start that process, so you know that you can have your paperwork thoroughly considered. That's why we use Melanie for all of our clients. I know we can send a soft copy to Melanie and her team will start tearing it apart. Melanie, from land contract perspective, is there very much room for the purchaser to negotiate the terms of the land contract? And what do you look for inside a land contract?
So you're talking about a land contract as opposed to a building contract?
Yeah, let's do the land first and then rock into HIA.
Okay. So yes, there is scope to negotiate a land contract, negotiate on price, settlement date, whether it's conditional on building reports, pest reports, finance, whether there are any special conditions that go along with the purchase. Some people will try and make their new purchase subject to their old property selling. We see a bit of that. Some land contracts are for estates, so they're subject to probate of an estate being granted. There is scope there, and we are seeing that properties that have been on the market for quite some time, they are having to reduce their prices, and there are major negotiations going on regarding reductions in purchase prices. So that's good for purchasers, not so good for
Yeah.
vendors. That point that you want your conveyancer or lawyer to look at the Section 32 for the property, which contains all of the relevant information about the land, who owns it, what planning scheme it is in, whether it's subject to any overlays that might affect the way you want to use the property. Preferably have your lawyer looking at that in advance.
Always.
But if it has been a bit of a time crunch, you do have a 3-day cooling off period. So if you want to get it to your lawyer quick smart after you've signed it, you might still be able to cool off, but don't assume that you can cool off, because there are limited circumstances that you can't use a cooling off period in, particularly in relation to an auction. So if you are going to an auction, you buy as is, there's no room for negotiation thereafter once you've signed.
Inside of purchasing land in new estates, the reason why we have our clients' soft copies sent immediately to our client's conveyancer is because, and we had a situation like this recently, a client was about to sign land on an unconditional land contract, which means that you're buying it regardless. We had his solicitor look at that immediately before signing, and there were 2 easements running underneath the land that the purchaser was not aware of. Now, if we had not got involved, he would have had to have bought that land, and he only wanted a single story. He wouldn't have been able to do a single story. There would have been a post-contract variation, and he would have had to build a double story. Now, a double story in Melbourne is an additional $100,000 at least on the build cost. So our recommendation is subject to finance. So you're, so if you have to sign the land contract before your conveyancer, subject to finance and to your conveyancer reviewing the soft copy of contract always.
Definitely.
And Melanie's right. Don't, you know, in the established property market space, there are different anomalies and nuances that your conveyancer will understand. Go to them before you put your John Hancock on anything.
And some of it's very random. We had a client buy a property and she signed without advice, and it was an unconditional, so she was bound into it. And the project was subject to a covenant, which had all kinds of normal sort of stuff in it. But then it had this random line saying that she couldn't breed animals at the property. It was a residential property. And we mentioned it to her and said, this is a bit strange. And her face just fell and she went, that's my source of income, breeding these fancy dogs. And it's like, who thinks that? First time I've ever seen it in a covenant.
Gosh.
But that's the sort of thing, the random sorts of stuff you can find in there. So yeah, get some advice. Always get some advice.
Always. Let's look at the HIA contract, because the new scheme that's announced really is to inject some fuel into that particular marketplace.
Yeah.
I only work with builders that use the HIA contract, and I use it because there's some real rigour and some protection under that, using that particular document. It's a part of the association. It has been designed to protect both the builder and the purchaser, and there are insurances and other things involved in that. Melanie, unpack that HIA contract a little bit for us.
Sure. So the first thing that you're going to find as a purchaser under a building contract is it's probably really daunting. I don't know if you can see this.
It's probably really daunting. I see it.
It's not to me, but, you know, it's got all of these, you know, words and whatnot. And it doesn't necessarily read like a novel or a book. It's got special lingo in it. So don't just sign on the dotted line. Get somebody to have a look at it, preferably a lawyer. But one of the important things to notice with this is that there is a cooling off period on a HIA contract, which is great. But you can't get the cooling off period if you've had legal advice before you sign. So the chronology would be, preferably, you get the contract, you get your lawyer to look at it. Once you're happy with everything, you sign it. It won't work if you get advice, then you sign it, and then you have regret. You can't cool off in those circumstances. If you sign it and you've got no advice and you decide, I want to get out, you can. You've got 5 business days to do that. So that's good. But again, never sign anything assuming that you're going to be able to access a right to get out of it.
So you get 5 business days. Once you sign it, you get 5 working business days to pull out of a build contract. And
yes.
There's no condition upon doing that. You just have that as a right of way.
As long as you haven't previously entered into a major domestic building contract with that builder in relation to that property, and as long as you haven't received legal advice. But do note that it's not, there is a penalty for withdrawing, and your HIA building contract says it's $100 plus any out-of-pocket expenses that the builder has incurred. So you shouldn't have too many out-of-pockets at that point. It's only been 5 business days, but just be wary of that. If they've ordered searches, if they have applied for permits, those sorts of things, which might happen in this environment because we need to get things moving so quickly with this grant.
Yeah.
Just be aware of that.
Let me caveat that with, don't sign it unless you're absolutely certain that you want to move ahead with it. Like, don't do that to yourselves. Don't do that to the builder. It's just an ugly space. We always have a conversation with our clients around, you know, you have to literally change your psychology from being a person that rents a property to a person that becomes a buyer. Once you shift that gear, you want to really stand in, as long as there are no unforeseeable anomalies, that when you go into that undertaking as a homeowner or a purchaser, that you are committed to that process, obviously after the advice of your solicitor. Yeah, like we do fixed price full turnkey properties. How does someone discover that that is inside the contract? Is there anywhere that they need to particularly go to ensure that they're covered?
In terms of price and being locked into that price?
Yeah.
So every HIA building contract essentially has a schedule. It's called particulars of contract. It has all of the information about the builder, who the owners are going to be, what the building works are, and that's a really important thing to really get into the nitty-gritty of what the works are that are being done. Don't leave it up to a handshake agreement or just assume that the other party knows what you're wanting. Get down into the nitty-gritty. There are usually specifications prepared by the builder. They should be attached to the contract. So in that particular section, it talks about the land. It talks about what the build cost is. So the way it's usually set out is it says contract price, price excluding GST, what the GST is, and what the contract price ends up being. And it will say in that section what specific items are excluded from the contract. So most will say that the connections with gas, electricity, telephone are not included. So in your mind, think about all those services running down the front of your property, like near the nature strip, let's say.
Yeah.
It will be your cost to bring them from the nature strip up to the property. And that can be quite expensive, particularly where you're buying apartments. Now, the builder will usually take care of doing that in a practical way, but they will charge you to do that. So you've just got to be really careful about that sort of thing. So let's say that your HIA contract says your build price, including GST, is $300,000. It is not going to cost you $300,000. It might be more, it might be less, and you have to factor that in, unfortunately. So the major thing that we see is in relation to variations, that they push the price up.
Yeah, they call it post-contract variations, don't they?
Yes. So a post-contract variation might be that your builder gets halfway through the bathroom and you have a look at it and you go, oh, gee, now that I've seen it, I don't really like the position of the shower. I want to move it to the other wall, which is your prerogative.
Yeah.
But it's going to cost you. And there is a very strict process about how you need to request that variation from the builder, and they need to respond. And when the price for that variation is payable, it's payable at the next instalment, progress payment, which could be a cash flow issue for either party. So just be really careful around variations, because that's the major factor that really affects what your build price is.
I've got a family member that works for one of the major builders, and she said what's happening out there currently in the new build space is a lot of these builders with displays are ordering post-contract variations on signing a contract. Is there anywhere, like we do fixed price. Is there anywhere that the client can go inside the HIA contract to ensure that the builder cannot amend or change or charge post-contract variations?
It depends what the variations are. So if it's a builder instigated variation and it needs to be done, for example, because the council have come in and said you can't do it that way, you have to do it this way, then basically what happens is the builder goes back to the owner and says we have to do it this way. And they have to give a whole raft of information about why we're trying to do it, what has changed, what sort of costs we're looking at, what sort of delay in the construction time we are looking at. And if it has been mandated by an authority, then there's not much that you can do as an owner. Yeah. But if your builder comes back and says that, you know, I want to shift the shower because I think it looks better, then no, you don't need to consent to that. Provided that you notify the builder in writing that you're not consenting to it. Now, you do have to consider with those sorts of changes whether it's going to frustrate the contract, in the sense that if the builder doesn't make this change.
Such a good terminology.
Frustrate
the contract.
Yeah.
I love it.
If that variation is really necessary as a practical situation point of view,
yeah,
then you do need to consider why you're saying no to it and whether that is going to have an impact on everything else, including the price. So, but the important thing to notice about that and to turn your mind to is don't just borrow enough for the $300,000 build. Make sure you've got a buffer in there, because I've never seen a building contract that has come in on price or under price. They always go over, and that's not necessarily the fault of the builder, but it's just how things seem to practically work.
So Is the purchaser protected by the HIA contract? So is there an insurance inside of that contract where if, say, the builder goes broke, is there any room for the, are they actually protected? What makes the HIA contract so good?
So the HIA contract is protected, and there is builder's warranty insurance that goes ahead under these contracts, which basically means that if there's a major structural defect with the property after the build is finished, that you can go after the builder for that. And if the builder goes bust, then this policy continues to apply. So you don't need to worry about, well, what happens in 5 years if the side of the house falls off. You've got this builder's warranty insurance. Have they gone bankrupt? Do they no longer exist? That's fine. You can still enforce this insurance policy,
Right.
to make sure you can get the side of your house rebuilt. But it is major issues with your house. It's not minor things like it's slightly moved or some tiles fell off the wall. It literally is
My house is not
major structural defects.
So I want to go back to this really quickly because I just want to, I've got a lot of people signing fixed price contracts with me, and it just feels a bit selfish to keep you in that space, but I just want to understand it a little bit more on my end. If a client buys a fixed price full turnkey house, when they look at that contract, how will they know that that's a fixed price? So my builder warrants that if he goes to land and there's rock under that land, he said he will cover the cost of that. How do they know that's actually so when they look at that contract?
So what you'd be looking for that is in special conditions. So a lot of the larger building companies, house and land package companies, will have their own special conditions to the contract to say that they won't charge for that sort of thing, because they can afford to bear that cost across, they might be building 200 properties at one time. And if they're doing that, they can afford to wear the $10,000 cost of removing rock or something like that. But your smaller builders are probably not going to be able to wear that sort of thing. And it may be increased under your contract.
We need to find that, don't we, on that HIA contract for our client. I need to ask my builder where that clause is. So
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, done.
Speaking about fixed price contracts, so also factor in prime cost matters. So a prime cost item is usually a fixture or a fitting like taps, ovens, things like that, that you may not select at the time that you enter into the building contract, and the cost, or you might select it but the cost is not known at that time. So the builder will make an allowance in the contract for that. They might go, okay, right, you want to get the fancy oven, it's $5,000, we're working that into the price. But if the amount changes, then of that item, then we've got to look at, what happens under your contract. Go back to your contract. Do you have to pay extra? Do you get a discount, etc.? And in the HIA contract, it says, I've just got it right in front of me. So let's say your oven is $5,000 that you thought it would be, and it comes in at $4,000, then you get that discount of $1,000. But if it comes in at $8,000, then you're going to end up paying more for that. The difference is added to the purchase price. So you're going to pay another $3,000 for that. And that's something really important to consider, because in previous cases that I've had, The builders, a couple of builders have said, right, go to so-and-so, my cabinet people, and pick out your kitchen. And we've made an allowance of $3,000 for cabinetry, etc.
Yeah.
And so the clients have gone off to the cabinet maker, had a look. Yes, this is what we want. And it turns out that they find out after the fact that that was worth $7,000. So the builder is attempting to charge an extra $4,000, which they're entitled to do under the contract.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised how quickly those things add up. So have a really good look when the purchase price is itemised down as to what that includes, what allowance has been made for those items. I don't know about you, but I had to buy some tapware recently, and I just like, this is too much. I just need to,
isn't it?
I need to put something together MacGyver style with some wood blocks and rubber bands.
I'm going to my mate's place and I'm stealing a tap when I use the bathroom. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, totally. So watch out for those prime cost items, particularly because as you go along in your build, you might be looking at it and thinking, well, actually, I wish I'd got those more expensive taps. I wish I'd got that clawfoot bathtub. And if you're then adding those in, your price is going up and up and up. And it's not unusual to see a build contract where the additional variations between prime cost items, fixtures and fittings, things like that, can be over $100,000. So it's a massive extra to your purchase price. So if you're thinking the build's going to cost $300,000, you'd be wanting to put at least aside another 10%, I think, just to be safe.
Yeah,
at least, at the very minimum.
We always say to our clients, we'll do a package for them, and they may come back at me saying, I've got one lady that wants a bath in the walk-in bathroom ensuite, and I'm like, don't do it. Do not do it. Let's get you into your property, and when you're in there and you're settled and you're paying that mortgage and everything's comfortable, if you want to do it then, absolutely. But the target must be that people initially look at getting into their own homes first and doing it that it's affordably comfortable. You know, people forget about the affordability and run away with the trinkets and the upgrades, and really don't do it. Get into your home, settle in, and then as time progresses, upgrade those various different areas. Absolutely. Melanie, thank you. You are a legend. Looking forward to hanging out with you when we finally get the legislation. Woohoo!
Won't that be nice? I'll read that on a Saturday night, shall I?
Take care, my friend. All the best. And I look forward to interviewing you in the next couple of weeks when all of this shall unveil itself.
Sounds good to me.